Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now before we get started, just the standard stuff. If you really like the show, be sure to support it by subscribing to it wherever you see it. That could be here on YouTube, or you could be listening to it on your favorite podcast platform of choice. Basically, if you can see or hear me, you can subscribe to the show there. And if you do subscribe to the show and it allows you to rate it somehow, please give the show a 5-star rating. It really helps the show. It really helps visibility, all that stuff. If you absolutely love the show and want to share it with your friends, that would also be great. In addition to that, if you can't get enough of what I'm doing here, you can go over to the show's website. That site is bento-box.ghost.io. You can find that link anywhere you find the show in the description. So in the description of this episode, in the description on the YouTube channel page, in the description of the show on your favorite podcast platform, both the individual episode and the show itself. It's everywhere, and you can go click and see articles related to, and see accompanying little written pieces for many of the episodes. I'm constantly behind because I'm only one man, but also a couple articles up over on the site pertaining to anime. The most recent one is a thing which is pretty relevant right now about anime and money, and ways that anime treats money, from characters in Eden of the East who are hyper-rich to characters like Yamato from Yorigami, who is hyper-poor. So definitely go check out that article and others over on the site. But if you want something more interactive, or you want a great alternative to, say, your typical anime watch list app, I have been developing one for a little while now. It's called Bento Watch, and it is my take on a watch list app with a kind of critical toolbox of tools to help you not just watch and keep track of what you're watching in terms of anime, but think about things. Think about and record your thoughts on individual episodes, on anime as a whole. There's a whole quick notes section in there that does that. And you can find that in the top navigation bar of the site and sign up for the beta for that, since I've been a little lazy on getting that thing on the actual Apple App Store, but I will do that eventually, hopefully. This usually serves as my cattle prod to myself of doing that. But on that note, let's jump into what we're talking about this week. And that's something pretty different, because it's not anime, not even manga, it's not a movie or a TV show, it's a book series. And you've probably heard of it before, but I am going to toss it over to Ive to give us a plot description. And that book series is Dungeon Crawler Carl. So, take it away, Ive.
Dungeon Crawler Carl is a darkly funny litRPG series about Carl, a regular guy, and his ex-girlfriend's spoiled cat, Princess Donut, who survive after aliens destroy most of Earth and turn the remains into a deadly televised dungeon game show. Carl is forced to fight through floor after floor of bizarre monsters, traps, quests, and reality TV-style cruelty while the galaxy watches for entertainment. Donut becomes magically intelligent and famous, while Carl slowly turns from unlucky survivor into a dangerous rebel who starts pushing back against the system. It's basically Running Man meets D&D meets reality TV, with lots of violence, absurd comedy, and surprisingly emotional moments.
Now, before we jump into, with the plot synopsis out of the way, before we jump into my thoughts on Dungeon Crawler Carl and all that stuff, I want to demonstrate my thinking process. I want to demonstrate my thinking process with something completely different than Dungeon Crawler Carl and anime, but also related to anime. And that's a game that came out. And one of my many weird things is I am not typically a car person. I appreciate cars as designed objects, and as somebody who went to school for design and is a creative person and has been a creative designer for my entire professional life. I appreciate anything that's well-designed, and I especially appreciate anything that's well-designed with like a singular purpose in mind, and that has a no-hold-barred approach to making a thing for a singular purpose. Examples of this are things like drafting tools. Those are usually specifically not made for writing anything. They're made for drafting technical drawings. Another example that is probably much closer to what people think of as this kind of thing is watches, both wrist and pocket. Those are things, and there are things called tool watches, which are watches meant for specific things. There's one of the most bizarre of which is a doctor's watch, which if you've never seen a doctor's watch, has a secondary track on it that is meant to help doctors keep track of people's pulse and do the counting for blood pressure readings. But those are very specifically designed objects for the act of keeping and telling time on all levels. But cars are another in that thing. They are transportation tools designed to express that. So I do appreciate cars on that level, but I'm not someone who would want to own very specific car. I can't say that. I do. If I was going to own any car, I would own a Toyota Crown taxi cab car. If you've ever been to Japan and you've been in one of their taxis, and you've been in a black taxi cab, which they're all over Japan, the car I'm talking about, that's the car I would own if I could own any car. But suffice it to say that video games are a great outlet for just fantasy living, essentially, and so many video games are about that. And a while back, I think it was like Forza Horizon 3, I played one of them on the Xbox 360. Ever since, I've had a soft spot in my heart for racing games. And I keep a side eye on them. I very often will play heavily fighting games and other types of games, but racing games are also mixed in there occasionally. And with the addition of Forza Horizon 6, which literally comes out on the day I'm recording this, because I'm recording this a day early, they finally go to Japan. And it had now checked all the boxes. I actually bought the game, so the premium edition of the game, so I could play it early. And hilariously, the very first quote-unquote race that you take part in is a race through their version of Central Tokyo, since very often racing games will not create a map of an entire country. They'll create a map of a best of an entire country, so you can feel the vibe of a place, but they're not making something that's so gargantuan that you can't wrap your brain around it. But the very first race is a race through an area that feels very much like Shinjuku and Akihabara, and all the iconicness of the massiveness of Tokyo. And it's set to YOASOBI's Idol, the opening for Oshinoko. So, and I've talked about this a little bit before in other places, I'm not sure if I've ever said this before, but when I went to Japan from 2023 to 2024, I went basically over New Year's, which is a very weird time to go to Japan, but it's the time when I typically have off to be able to do that, so it's usually when I do that. When I do my traveling, it's usually when most people don't, because I work in a very seasonal industry professionally, and the time I get off is winter, essentially. But, so I'm in Japan, and this was near the tail end of this was after when Idol had initially blown up and taken over all the Billboard charts, and was number one on all of these charts for an insane amount of time. This was when it had receded back into just being part of music culture and showing up occasionally places. And I had this very weird experience in Japan. Well, a place that I loved the idea of before I went, and now I love in reality. It is probably my favorite country to go to. Tokyo is probably my favorite city I've ever been to. But I would be walking around Tokyo, and I would hear in the world somewhere Idol by YOASOBI. And that became the calling card of whatever's about to happen, whatever I'm about to turn the corner into is going to be worth it. And so to spend the money to play this game early and to start it up and go through all the stuff, and then what I'm greeted with is a street race through Tokyo to Idol is a checkbox. There's so many ways you could have tuned this game to speak to a number of people, but this is a very specific way to speak to me in a way that's really incredible. And the reason why I'm saying this is because so much of other things are now informed by the cultural lexicon that anime has given the entertainment world and the world of making media that it's ubiquitous. So in Dungeon Crawler Carl, to bring it back to what we're talking about, there are numerous, even in the 8th book, which just came out and that I finished a couple days ago, A Parade of Horribles is the name of the book. And I listen to these books because the audio production on these books is incredible. But even in the 8th book, there's a team of racers. By the way, spoilers for all of Dungeon Crawler Carl. If you aren't caught up, I suggest you go read it, or I would actually really suggest you go listen to it, either through the Sound Boost Theater app or the Audible app. You can get it both places. You can get all the books both places, and they do an incredible job in terms of the production of this thing. It's like listening to an audio drama, to a radio drama, more than it's listening to just an audio book. It's incredible. But they have a team called Team Yokai that is exclusively really almost in the tradition of not just yokai monsters, but almost like Akira Toriyama-esque yokai monsters. They have a bunch of kitsune-style foxes who are also ninja, kind of thing. It feels very early Dragon Ball in a bizarre way. And that is to say that, and all of these things are influencing each other, and none of it exists in a vacuum, and people like Matt Dinniman are encountering, the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl, are encountering anime in the way that people who create anime, I'm sure, have encountered Matt Dinniman's books as they were translated into Japanese. And that, I think that cultural exchange is important, but I also think that the goals of different things are different for each creator. For example, I think Matt Dinniman is doing a masterclass in how to write a character who is truly and to their bones angry in a way that, like, you don't see captured very often in, you don't see captured in a way that's taken seriously, and that demonstrates the kind of effect of, like, felt in your bones, will never go away, will be with you, has always been with you, and will be with you until you are in the ground anger that has throughout the entirety of the books. Even in the moments when you see him in the very first book where he is the most afraid and the most what the heck is going on, he's clear that he's still impossibly angry about all of this. And that he's been impossibly angry about so much even before the dungeon starts in the books. And the books kind of reach back into Carl's past. They reach back into a lot of the characters' past, but they reach back specifically into Carl's past to be like, this guy was always pissed, but now he's got something to aim it at, and like of life has crystallized to such an extent that anger can be externalized and it feels rational in a way that it doesn't if you just have a girlfriend who, like, you love, but is also an asshole and definitely cheating on you. And, like, on you because you are kind of a paycheck. It turns out in case. But you're wondering, like, well, I doubt that Japanese, like, creators consume stuff in that way. You are totally wrong. So many Japanese creators, tons of American media. A perfect example is Into the Spider-Verse movies. The first Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie was so mind-melting for the Japanese animation industry. I really can't explain it any other way than that. It is that animated film is so transformative to all animation that the newest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated movie looks the way it does because of the Spider-Verse movie. There are tons of things coming out as CGI animated films that owe the way they look specifically to the Spider-Verse movies. Though that original film, as a very specific kind of production, has paid off in spades and has informed things. There's a Tokyo Drive cyberpunk thing on Netflix that just, like, wholesale takes, that's very anime-esque, but in terms of its story and its story treatment, but wholesale takes the aesthetic quality of the Spider-Verse movie and applies it to that show. And believe me, so if there is cultural relevance to a form of entertainment media, it is being passed around and crossbred throughout all of it. Matt Dinniman is clearly, like, he has some level of knowledge about anime, because he references it specifically in his books. I have no doubt there are Japanese animators who have read those books in Japanese. The cross-pollination is there, is my point. And I think that I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there's a very big overlap in the Venn diagram of people who like Dungeon Crawl Carl and people who like anime, because they share a lot of the same things. And the murder game genre, very many people consider to be started by by Battle Royale. I think it was made back in the 90s. And that, if you've never seen Battle Royale, I encourage you to go seek it out. Fair warning, that movie's pretty brutal. And I didn't really think about that movie being pretty brutal, because I'd seen it at least twice, and I saw it long enough ago where it's just a thing that exists to me. But a very old friend says that he bristles against death game anime because they are specifically brutal in a uniquely cruel, helpless way. And he bristles against Dungeon Crawl Carl, the concept of Dungeon Crawl Carl, for the same reason. But I totally see and understand that. These, if you don't head into it with the right mindset, these can feel very specifically odd. But my point there is, everything is kind of cyclical. This is very, Dungeon Crawl Carl is very much a death game kind of property. It's also very much an isekai kind of property. It's a trapped in a video game kind of thing. And so it all lines up with isekai, with what Jeff Sue calls the isekaitis of it all. The isekai genre can sit right next to Dungeon Crawl Carl, and it makes a lot of sense. But I want to come back to the anger in Carl as a character, because I think that a lot of people are really afraid to depict anger in characters that doesn't feel stereotypical and feel truly scary. The thing about Carl in these books is he is so angry. He's angry. He's two Wolverines put together, Wolverine the Marvel character, Wolverines on coke level of anger. He is irrationally angry and becomes high on his own supply angry on behalf of humanity because of on behalf of, at first, humanity, and then on behalf of the greater galaxy and universe, because this is a systematized, repeatable eradication of species that happens every couple years, essentially. It's the way the book describes it. And the thing the books do really well is they create a scenario in which that amount of rage and that kind of anger is justifiable and understandable. And it never lets up, so you keep understanding that he's pissed. Who wouldn't be at this point? And that's a really hard thing to do, because lots of people don't. Sadness is an ugly emotion, but it is an understandable one. And that is because most anybody has known somebody who's died and has felt that deep well of unbelievable sadness. But anger feels scary, because anger has destructive quality and has a destructive reputation too. One of my favorite characters in all of media is a character I've probably talked about him on the podcast before, the character in this show called Survivor's Remorse, which is an old Star show from, I think, probably more than a decade now, because Stars has been not a thing for a while. Well, Stars has not been a public channel that's on for most people in a while. But basically, Survivor's Remorse is this show about a basketball player, about an up-and-coming basketball player who came out of the ghettos of Baltimore, and has come up through the ranks and is experiencing stardom for the first time, and he's pulling his entire family along for the ride. And the show is really about people from his past coming to find him because he's famous now. And it's also about his manager, who's also his family, and his extended family adjusting to a whole new world of wealth and opportunity and all this other stuff, while keeping the sharks at bay of people who were like, oh, you're balling now, so you can afford to give me a little bit. And one of the greatest characters for me in that show is the team owner, the person who is the owner of the team that Cam, the main character, plays on. And I think his name is Flattery. And he is one of the single most angry characters on television. It's incredible. Ari Gold has nothing on the, so he's another one, on the kind of anger that this basketball team owner displays on just like a casual Tuesday. And they write the shit out of him. And he is also one of the only white characters very often in the scenes he's in. But he has this full motion and movement through his anger that is, he almost escapes being angry and becomes transcendental and enlightened. And the specific thing I'm thinking of where Cam is at a hospital, and spoilers for Survivor North, I guess. Cam's uncle dies, and the doctors have to do the impossible task that all doctors have to do, and all doctors are ultimately, they're approached by this and holy shit. And it's always hard, and actually the most recent episode of Scrubs did a great job with this too, of going out and giving the family of a patient who had passed away just the most horrible news you can ever tell. You have to go tell somebody their family member is dead, and that family member could be their uncle, it could be their father, it could be their kid. You have to take the most horrible thing in the world and give it to the worst possible person. It's a terrible, incredibly soul-breaking thing that you have to go do. And in Scrubs, and Scrubs is a really renowned show for depicting what it's like to be a doctor and be a medical worker. And Scrubs, they have this kind of comedy routine, and it's treated really tastefully, but they say, like, no, you have to do this. You have to do this. You have to get, like, as good as anyone can be at this. And the doctor in Survivor's Remorse who gives this news to Cam and his family do not do a good job. They don't stick the landing on it. And while that happens, it's one of those things that's really important that you get. There's no way to get it right, but there's definitely a way to get it wrong, and they just got it wrong. And the basketball character walks back, follows the doctors back, and just reads them the riot act of what the hell? This is not. I'm not saying, and in the story, he's so wealthy that he's donated a wing to this hospital. He is on the board of directors. It's like, even if I wasn't involved in this hospital, I would still expect more out of you. Not because I've paid your paycheck, but because you are a human being. And, like, it's such an incredible use of a character because it's like, and they do this a couple times with him, oftentimes to comedic effect, and in this moment they do it to dramatic effect, where it turns anger into a story tool to be pointed at other characters and at a situation and be used to fully dissect it. And that's what happens very often in Dungeon Crawler Carl. They're the great, once again, the production for the audiobook by Sound Booth Theater, and with tremendous lift from Jeff Hayes, the main voice actor who voices Carl, who voices Princess Donut, the talking cat, and a bunch of other characters, is so important that every once in a while clips from the book will go wide, and clips from the audio version of the book will go wide. And one of the clips from the audio version of the book is just talking about representative government, and in the world of the book, Carl is talking out loud to the viewer because it's, at that point in the book series, it's long understood that there are viewers, and he's just speaking into the open air as if he's on a reality show, because essentially, for the rest of the universe, he is. And he's like, if you don't like your situation, change it. If you don't like the people who put you in this situation, get rid of them and put in new people. Maybe do it yourself, build it yourself. And it's so cliche, but the nugget is there, so much so that I vaguely remember that it starts something in the book. And ultimately it reverberates out into a bigger thing. Only, much like Jim Flattery in the scene in the hospital with the doctors after they botched the delivery of terrible news to Cam and his family, in that moment, he's saying something for essentially the camera, both the wider world, but also the viewer, but also the listener and reader. But most of the time, he's not. So they have these moments where he will intentionally do that, and other characters will intentionally do that, but for the most part, he's just moving through the world with anger that a worse writer than Matt Dinniman would call righteous. But Matt Dinniman isn't doing that for a very specific reason. Like, Carl's anger is not treated as righteous. It's treated as volatile. It's treated as chaotic. It's treated as a potential thing that can spin out and cause all kinds of problems. And oftentimes does. By the 8th book, he's much more constrained. But even in the 8th book, there's a moment where he just hulks out on the side of somebody's car, almost destroying it, because at this point, he is essentially like a late game leveled character and just destroys the side of this other team's car. And because the 8th book starts with wacky races, almost Redline-esque, double wacky racer kind of treatment. And I think in some truly great and incredible anime, you see characters like this. And even in some not necessarily incredible anime, you see characters like this. In Tenjo, the Oh Great manga turned anime. Manga is significantly better and more interesting than the anime, because the anime didn't get to go as far as the manga does, which is often the case with stuff. But in that show, even in the show part, you get to the part where Bunshishi, who's like a secondary lieutenant, who's the second most powerful character in the world of that show. They have a massive flashback. They have a massive arc that takes place in a flashback. And in the flashback, the status quo of the show in the flashback is coming undone around the characters. Stuff is starting to unravel. And building up to the environment, and building up to create the environment that the main characters in the present day live in and with. And what the best part of the show of Tenjo Tenge is that it takes the time to show you the stuff that nobody's talking about. That like other younger characters, the main cast, could never know. So you have context for Mitsuomi in present day. So you have context for Bunshishi in present day. But Bunshishi is left dealing with the ramifications of stuff around him, and because he's not on the inside technically, nothing's being explained to him. In the same way that nothing's being explained to Carl. And eventually he blows his top with his bare hands. Tolls his car with a singular punch. And knocks somebody unconscious and drags her unconscious body to a taxi cab, where he refuses to let the taxi cab leave until the taxi takes him to where he wants to go, to get some fucking answers. Because he's had it up to here with this petty, stupid, secretive bullshit. He basically gets to the point where somebody's got to use their goddamn words to explain why the fuck my best friend is wandering around with a demon sword, murdering people, and we're all trying our hardest to pretend it's Tuesday. This is not cool. I'm gonna need a whole lot of explanation right now, or I cave into the side of this house, and your house, and possibly all your teeth. That's where he gets. But try as I might, I can't think of other characters who display that kind of anger that's not, and I want to be clear here, that's not seen as righteous. And I think that's important. Now I'm going to pause here to change the battery on my camera, but now that the battery's changed. But the kind of incredible thing to me is, once again, the fact that Dungeon Crawl Carl, and it's been optioned, I believe, by Seth MacFarlane, the Family Guy creator, and famously the creator of both the Ted movie and the Ted TV show, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. but to be turned into a series, which I find interesting because there was the first season of Ted and then the second season of Ted, and Ted was incredibly successful and is incredibly popular, but they aren't making any more of it because it's too expensive to produce. So I find it really funny that he's jumping from something that's incredibly popular and incredibly well received. But both movies are tons of fun, and both seasons of the TV show are really fun. But it's just too much money, specifically to do the animation around Ted, the talking teddy bear, voiced by Seth MacFarlane. Because it's like you're doing some Industrial Light and Magic shit for whole episodes, and he's in like almost every scene. So it's just constant, and apparently it's like a money fountain that no one can figure out how to tap or even constrain. But he's optioned it with Matt Dinniman, who is actually the owner of much of the rights of Dungeon Crawl Carl. If you're reading the book from Penguin Random House, they have the print rights for the book, because Matt Dinniman very smartly kept the digital rights for the book. Which is why you see so much media related to Dungeon Crawl Carl, because Matt Dinniman can just go out there and be like, sure, pay me this amount and you get the rights and go with it. But I find it really interesting that Seth MacFarlane was like, well, a talking cat can't cost more than a talking teddy bear, right? He's like jumping out of the pan and into the fire on the cost there in my brain. Unless he's planning on doing it as an animation, which is entirely possible, which would be tons of fun. But I really love listening to these books because I always love, as somebody who has in himself that visceral level of anger, that amount of anger that feels dangerous even to hold in you. I'm sure I'm not alone, but I'm self-aware enough to see it in me and be like, ooh, let's not touch that ever. And I am so angry. That overwhelming anger has found its way out in enough ways where I have been like, hey, you should go to therapy. You should, if you can't get rid of this, you should at least learn how to manage it. If you are annoyed with someone, it did not turn into a fire hose where you are pouring all of your negative emotions about the world at each situation that comes up. And I went to therapy for a long time, and it helped me create a conceptual framework for dealing with that anger day to day, and I'm very grateful for it. I encourage you to go to therapy for any reason. Just give it a shot. But I don't particularly care how you attempt it. Although I would encourage you to try and go to in-person therapy. I've done both, and in-person therapy is incredibly more helpful in my mind. But I always appreciate it when I see a character who displays that, where the writing helps display that kind of anger, because I think it's important and interesting. But to have that kind of anger on display. But that's where I'm going to leave it. So, yeah.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.